You've been right your entire life and punished for it. You felt it before they said it. You knew before they knew. You warned them before it happened. And still, they didn't listen. You saw the ending before the beginning had even unfolded, and when it came, they looked at you like you were supposed to be proud, as if being right was the reward for carrying the burden alone. But it wasn't a reward, it was a wound. You learned to stop sharing, not because you didn't know, but because you always knew too soon. Carl Jung once stood in your shoes. In 1913, he was gripped by a series of visions, a monstrous flood submerging Europe, rivers turning to blood, a cold darkness settling over the land. He thought he was losing his mind. This was before there was a single newspaper headline, before a single nation declared war. He kept the visions to himself, ashamed, afraid, questioning his sanity. Then the war came, exactly as he saw it. Jung would later realize what you've always known. Sometimes the mind doesn't imagine. Sometimes it remembers what hasn't happened yet. He called it introverted intuition, a kind of perception that doesn't deal with what is, but with what wants to be. It doesn't rely on facts. It listens for meaning. It moves silently beneath the surface, like a river the rest of the world forgot. And if that's how your mind works, then you know the curse that follows. You speak in patterns, and they call you confusing. You predict, and they call it coincidence. You feel what's unsaid, and they call you dramatic. You name the truth too early, and they call you wrong until it becomes undeniable. Then they forget you ever spoke. You've been trained to doubt your knowing. You've been told over and over again that seeing something isn't the same as proving it. So now you hesitate, you water down your instincts, you edit your inside, you stop mid-sentence and let the silence say what they wouldn't believe anyway. And slowly the one who once saw with crystal clarity learns to question the lens. That's not a flaw, that's trauma. That's what happens when a visionary is raised in a world that only believes in hindsight. But here's the paradox no one ever explained. Your insight was never the problem, your timing was, you were just early. And when you're early, the world calls it delusion. When you're right on time, they call it intuition. When you're late, they call it obvious. But you've never arrived on time. You've always arrived first. And that means you've always arrived alone. You carry what Jung carried, a vision too large to hold, and no one to help you hold it. So you bury it. You camouflage it in logic. You mask it with humor. You convince yourself that it's safer to be silent than to speak a language only you understand. But silence isn't safe. It's suffocating, and you feel it in your chest, in your throat. That ache of unspoken knowing, that quiet grief of having seen too much too clearly for too long. This is not a personality trait. This is not a social quirk. This is a calling, a psychological architecture, a sacred symbolic system designed for one purpose: to perceive what others cannot yet see. You don't live by evidence, you live by patterns, by impressions, by the shape of what is forming in the fog. And if you've spent your life being misunderstood, it's because most people don't hear symbols. They wait for sirens, but you've heard the sirens long before the smoke. You've seen the fracture before the surface even cracked. And if no one ever told you that this was a gift, let me be the first. This is not your flaw, it is your function. And if it hurts, it's because you've been taught to carry it alone. You don't have to anymore. There's a pattern inside you, a map, an intelligence you never asked for but have always lived with. It's time to return to it, to walk back into the part of you that always knew, to trust what the world couldn't see, to step into the truth that your doubt tried to bury. You are not broken, you are just beginning. So let's start there, where your vision begins and where your silence finally ends. Your thoughts don't move like theirs, they unfold. You don't arrive at conclusions, you arrive at images, impressions, shapes, forming in silence. You aren't confused. You're tracking 1,000 things they've never even noticed. And for that, you've been told your whole life to explain what was never meant to be explained. You've been asked to reduce the sacred into the scientific, to turn your inner forest into a spreadsheet, to translate your knowing into a language that strips it of meaning. And when you couldn't, they assumed you had nothing to say. But what lives inside you isn't nothing. It's mythic, it's ancient. It's the symbolic compass Jung spent his life trying to name. He called it introverted intuition, but even that word fails. It's not a process, it's a place, a cathedral in your chest, a sacred forest your thoughts walk through before they take form, a mirror that reflects what hasn't happened yet but is already on its way. That's why you pause before speaking. That's why you retreat in conversations that stay at the surface. That's why you often find yourself overwhelmed in places others call normal. It's not overstimulation, it's overtranslation. You are interpreting everything all at once: the tone, the subtext, the motive, the metaphor, the memory it triggers, the path it might take, and they call it quiet, they call it shy, they call it overthinking. They don't know they're talking to someone who lives between dimensions. Rilke once said the future enters into us in order to transform itself in us long before it happens. You've lived that. Every time you felt something shift in a relationship before they admitted it. Every time you had a dream you couldn't shake, a sense you couldn't prove, a message you couldn't phrase, and later realized it was real all along, but you stopped talking about it because no one understood, and the few who did made you feel like it was magic when it was simply the way you're wired. So you began to question it, not because you were wrong, but because being disbelieved enough times makes even truth feel like hallucination. This is where the pain begins, not in the knowing, but in the hiding, because your way of knowing doesn't need validation, but your humanity does. And when you've spent your whole life navigating by invisible stars, it hurts to be told there's no sky. But the stars are still there. The symbols are still speaking. The fog is not confusion, it's formation. You're not lost, you're listening. And what you're listening to is real. So stop trying to force it into clarity. Stop trying to make it linear. Stop trying to be understood by those still waiting for proof of what you already feel in your bones. This forest was never meant to be cleared. It was meant to be walked slowly, reverently, intuitively. So walk. You are not behind, you are not broken, you are not imagining it. You are in the sacred part of the mind where meaning begins. And the deeper you go, the more you'll remember that you were never confused. You were decoding. It starts slowly, not with a scream, but a silence, not with collapse, but with contraction, a shrinking of your voice, a soft edit of your instinct. You begin to withhold what you know because experience has taught you the moment you share it, they'll ask you to prove it. And how do you prove what you just feel? How do you justify the pattern you sensed before the pieces even arrived? You can't, so you don't. You hold it instead, and it grows heavy. Carl Jung once described the introverted intuitive as someone who sees images forming beyond the edge of consciousness. But he also warned that these images, if not expressed, could become dangerous, not to others, but to the one who carries them. Because when you're a seer in a world that fears prophecy, you stop believing your own vision, you begin to doubt it, to file it under imagination, to shame yourself for being too sensitive, too intense, too early. And the most painful part, you don't need anyone else to silence you anymore. You do it yourself. That's when the spiral begins. You replay conversations that haven't even happened. You interpret silences louder than words. You study every gesture, every pause, every unseen motive until your insight becomes a prison. For the INFJ, this is the neat-eyed loop. Vision twisted by internal logic that never exits the self. For the INTJ, it's the knife-eye loop. Perception drowned in emotional resonance, unconfirmed but deeply felt. You're no longer guiding your thoughts, they're running you. You don't trust your instincts anymore. You test them, retest them, invalidate them until you no longer remember what certainty felt like. And when that tension finally breaks, you fall into the grip. Your inferior function, C, takes control. Suddenly you're consumed by details, urgency, the present moment. You binge information. You impulsively buy things. You distract, scroll, clean, run, rage, collapse. The visionary becomes reactionary. The one who once soared above time is now choking on the moment. And afterward, the shame. How did I lose control? Why did I say that? Why can't I get back to the clarity I had before? This is the curse of the seer, not that you're always right, but that you carry what others refuse to hold, and when they deny it, dismiss it, diminish it, you start to wonder if the fault was in your sight instead of in their blindness. But you are not the first to carry a vision the world ignored. Let me tell you a story. His name was Black Elk. At 9 years old, he collapsed unconscious in a Lakota village. For days he lay motionless, and in that silence he traveled. He saw a tree rising from the earth, its branches sheltering all people. He saw horses riding in all four directions. He saw the sacred hoop of nations, united, alive. And when he returned to the waking world, he tried to tell them, but they didn't believe him. They said he was sick, that it was just a dream. So he carried it, alone. For years he questioned whether the vision meant anything, until the world around him began to crumble, and everything he saw in that dream started to unfold in real life. It broke him, and it shaped him, and eventually it called him back. Not to relive the vision, but to live from it, to make it real through ritual, through teaching, through presence. That's what you're being called to do, not to prove what you saw, but to stop running from it, to stop treating your sight like it's something that needs permission, to stop asking the blind to validate the visionary, because your seeing was never the problem. Your silence was. And now that silence is ending. You're not here to explain your way back into their understanding. You're here to speak from the place that has always understood itself, because the vision that once burned you is the same one that now asks to be carried, not as a secret, but as a lantern. There's a cost to suppressing the sacred. Every time you ignore what you know, the body remembers. Every time you silence what you feel, the spirit shouts louder, and eventually the inner conflict becomes unbearable. You break. Not in one dramatic moment, but in tiny ways. You forget your insight. You start reacting instead of sensing. You chase noise because silence became too full of things you weren't allowed to say. You fall into the grip. Your intuition, once clear as a still lake, turns into fog. Your mind spins with no exit, and your soul goes quiet. You binge dopamine to feel alive again. You obsess over details that used to mean nothing to you. You lose the thread. Jung wrote about this. He called it the inferior function, the thing we suppress for so long that it erupts like a shadow, taking control when we're at our weakest. And when it passes, when you finally return to yourself, you don't recognize the place you left behind. You question your gift. You wonder if it was ever real. You think, maybe I was just broken all along. But you weren't broken. You were carrying a vision in a world that taught you to hide it. And that hiding, that's what broke you. Vision is meant to be spoken. Symbol is meant to be seen. Intuition is meant to be shared. When you lock it away, when you starve it of expression, it turns inward. It decays, it lashes out. You were never meant to live in hiding. You were meant to become a shape that your vision could inhabit. That's what Jung meant by individuation, becoming the person who can carry the soul's message without distortion, without shame. The collapse was never a failure. It was the moment the old structure couldn't hold you anymore. The moment your silence became heavier than your fear. And now you stand at a threshold, not a beginning, not an ending, a return. You're remembering how to listen again, how to trust that whisper, how to follow what you feel before the world demands a spreadsheet. You're remembering that seeing deeply doesn't mean you have to carry it alone, that you can share your knowing without performing it, without over-explaining, without asking for permission. The lantern doesn't apologize for the light it casts, it simply shines. You are the lantern, you are the symbol, you are the quiet one who returned from the silence, not as the same version they silenced, but as someone who no longer needs their approval to speak. The world may never fully understand what you carry, but it was never supposed to, because this vision, the one no one believed, it wasn't meant to convince them. It was meant to guide you, and now it's leading you home. Somewhere along the way, you thought you had to choose between intuition and action, between knowing and doing, between the part of you that sees and the part of you that speaks. So you chose safety. You let your vision stay quiet. You convinced yourself it was enough to carry truth inside you, even if no one else ever heard it. But silence over time becomes self-erasure, and hiding a gift doesn't protect it, it strangles it. You weren't meant to contain your insight, you were meant to shape something with it, not for the spotlight, not for validation, but because vision by nature longs for form. This is the heart of Carl Jung's work, what he called individuation, not just becoming yourself, but becoming whole. It's the path where all your fragments, your knowing, your doubt, your silence, your voice, start moving in the same direction, not perfectly, not all at once, but truthfully. And that's what this next part of your life is asking for, not more understanding, more integration. You already see deeply, now you must walk deeply. For INFJs, that means letting your intuition hold hands with your empathy, to stop softening your insight for the comfort of others and start expressing it with kindness, but without compromise. You're not here to mirror everyone. You're here to illuminate. For INTJs, it means inviting your execution back into the room, not to flatten your vision, but to build it into something real, to stop hiding behind perfectionism and start using your tools. Because mastery isn't the absence of flaws. It's the courage to begin even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. This is the balance types rarely learn, not the death of inner vision, but its embodiment. The idea isn't to be louder, it's to be whole. Not the mystic who hides in abstraction, not the strategist who outruns feeling, but the human who dares to speak the truth they carry in a world that often punishes truth. And yes, it still might hurt, it might still be misunderstood, but the pain of misunderstanding is not as heavy as the pain of self-betrayal. Because every time you silence yourself to fit in, you confirm the lie that your way of seeing doesn't belong here. But it does. You were not made to speak for everyone. You were made to speak for what hasn't been spoken, to name what others have only felt, to shine a light not on what is popular, but on what is real. This is the meaning of the lantern. In the tarot, the hermit stands alone, holding a single light. Not because he fears the world, but because he carries something the world forgot. He isn't a recluse, he's a guide, and he doesn't force anyone to follow him. He simply walks quietly, intentionally, with the light he kept alive through every dark night. That's what you're being asked to become now. Not a louder voice, a steadier one, not a performer, a presence. Because someone out there is still in the fog, still doubting what they feel, still waiting for a sign that their way of knowing is real. You don't need to convince them. You just need to walk past them holding your light, and when they see it, they'll remember their own. That's the gift you offer. Not just insight, but remembrance. Not just vision, but example. You are not here to explain yourself endlessly. You are here to live as evidence that this way of being is possible and that it matters. So pick up your lantern. And don't wait to be ready. You've been ready since the moment you saw what others couldn't. You were never meant to vanish, even when they ignored your voice, even when your visions were dismissed as mood swings or imagination, even when your silence was mistaken for disinterest. You were never supposed to disappear into the fog. You were born to understand. You were always meant to return. But not as the same version of yourself that once begged to be believed, not as the one who softened their voice just to be allowed in the room, not as the seer who carried everyone else's weight but never spoke their own truth. You return now not to explain, but to embody, not to ask for acceptance, but to stand as proof that what you carry is real. This is the part no one sees coming, the quiet power of the one who finally stops shrinking. Because when a visionary returns from their silence, they don't come back as a victim. They come back as a mirror. And in that mirror, others see their own buried knowing, their own silenced voice, their own hidden gift. You don't have to be loud to change someone's life. You just have to be true. You've seen too much to pretend otherwise. You've waited too long to go back. This is your emergence, your homecoming. your reclamation of a mind that was never broken, just built differently. And now you speak not because you need to be heard, but because someone else needs to hear it. Maybe it's the friend who spent their life doubting their gut. Maybe it's the creative who abandoned their intuition because it didn't fit the algorithm. Maybe it's the kid who knows something's wrong in their home but has no words for it yet. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's the part of you that has waited years for someone to say yes. That thing you feel, it's real. That way you see, it's rare. That depth you carry, it's needed. So say it out loud, in the comments, in your life, in your art, in your silence that now holds the dignity of someone who knows exactly who they are. Let others know they're not the only ones, because this world is full of quiet visionaries waiting for one person to prove that being misunderstood isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of return. You've walked the long way through your own shadow. You've seen the symbol beneath the surface. You've carried the truth through years of doubt, and now you are the one who reminds others what's possible. You are the vision no one believed, and you're still here, lantern in hand, voice intact, and a presence that says, without needing to convince anyone, this is what knowing looks like, this is what return feels like, this is what happens when a seer comes home.